Recall from an earlier lecture a tree like this one, showing the relationships within the Embryophyta, aka land plants, aka the plant kingdom. After two or three basal branches leading to the non-vascular plants, liverworts, mosses, and hornworts, we have the Polysporangiophyta, of which the truly vascular plants or Eutracheophyta is the only group still in existence today. The Eutracheophyta splits into the Lycophytes, club mosses, spike mosses, and quillworts of today, plus the giant plants of the Carboniferous forests like Lepidodendron, and the Euphyllophytes, the plants whose main innovation was flat leaves, those highly effective light-intercepting solar panels that we see on typical plants today. The Euphyllophyta underwent another split, with one branch leading to the Manilophytes, which are ferns, horsetails, as well as a few others, and the other branch having a few now extinct basal members, but still extremely well represented from the Permian onwards in the form of spermatophytes, or seed plants. We talked about some aspects of their basic biology in the previous video. And having been through seed plant biology, we're already farther out in the tree with respect to the Manilophytes. But so far, the context of our earlier mentioning of the Manilophyta was more focused in the way that they were A, dominant in the Carboniferous and less so in the time since, and B, constrained by their semi-aquatic gametophytic stages to habitats that are very wet, at least for long periods of the year. But Manilophytes, the ferns in particular, are actually quite successful within their wet habitat niches. As a group, ferns are in second place behind flowering plants as having the most species diversity among plants. A small subset of ferns have even evolved heterospore on their own, independently of the seed plants. Ferns are also important colonizers in the aftermath of cataclysmic death events. The palynological record shows an unequivocal fern spike, fern spores in superabundance relative to their previous levels after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction and, more recently, after the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. Besides ferns, the Manilophytes you might encounter are the horsetails and the whisk ferns, both plants with rather striking and recognizable appearances, and both, as you should expect, relegated to wet and/or shady habitats. On the non-Manilophyte side of the split, keeping track of plant fossils is more than a little confusing because of the way that any given species identified as an important plant in the fossil record might come from either before or after the Gymnosperm-Angiosperm most recent common ancestor. Fortunately for you, we're not going to talk about those plants. We're only going to care about the Gymnosperms and the Angiosperms. To preview the next video in this sequence, one solitary branch from this split eventually, after a long time, leads to the angiosperms or flowering plants. The other branch, our main focus in the remainder of this video, splits and then splits again into the four lineages that are represented by modern plants. This cluster of non-angiosperm seed plants is the Gymnospermi, literally meaning naked seeds for the way that the megasporophyll, the structure bearing the megasporangia and the megaspores, does not wrap around the megagametophyte, resulting in a megagametophyte and later a seed that sits naked on top of the megasporophyll. Well, maybe not entirely naked. Usually there's some kind of underwear, if you will, a cupule structure within which the megagametophyte is nestled. But the basic layout is that of a tostada, where the megasporophyll is the crispy tortilla and the seed is the topping. I like this metaphor to contrast with the way that angiosperms do things. Rather than having naked seeds on top of a tostada, angiosperms have vessel-enclosed seeds with more of a folded taco arrangement. The four phyla of modern gymnosperms are the Cycadophyta, cycads, the Ginkgophyta, ginkgos, the Coniferophyta, sometimes identified in textbooks as the Pinophyta, and this is a very successful group, dominating the standing biomass and diversity of gymnosperms today, and the Cnidophyta, consisting of a handful of relatively obscure plants that are somehow still irresistible to include in a discussion like this. The cycads are fern-like plants. Some people say palm-like, but I disagree. And some species are commonly used as decorative plants in landscaping. I will have shown you some live examples in our walk through campus. The ginkgos is a distinct clade of gymnosperms that, despite their past diversity, is represented by only one species today, Ginkgo biloba. Again, I will have taken you to visit the campus ginkgo trees as part of our laboratory walking tour, and I won't reiterate the details of that discussion here. As I mentioned briefly in an earlier lecture, cycads and ginkgos share the ancestral state of having motile sperm cells that erupt from the pollen grains after successfully landing and getting drawn into the pollination chamber of the female gametophyte. The other gymnosperms, conifers and neophytes, share the derived state of using pollen tubes for the delivery of sperm nuclei to the egg within the gametophyte. Conifers are familiar enough, and we will have seen a couple on our little walk, and we will have talked about the conifer-specific details of their biology. The Neophyta are unfortunately not represented in the campus collection. I've tried to grow some of the more interesting neophytes, but so far I haven't had any success. The two most interesting members of the Neophyta are adapted to life in very arid habitats, like deserts. Welwitschia is one. This bizarre plant, native to the Namib Desert in Africa, produces only 2 leaves that grow continually over its multi-hundred-year lifespan. Its desert gets effectively no rain, but it does have coastal fog rolling in daily, and Welwitschia is somehow able to make use of fog-derived water to meet its needs, even transporting some of that water down to the root system. The other neophyte, less exotic but still interesting, is Ephedra, a genus of desert plant including this Asian species, Ephedra sinica, which is well known for loading its tissues with substantial quantities of the chemical ephedrine. Ephedrine is basically speed in the class of amphetamines that will bump up your metabolism, making you more alert and active while increasing the rate in which you burn calories. Ephedra sinica, aka Ma Huang, is used in traditional Chinese medicine for a lot of things, but Westerners have figured out that this is something that will burn off body fat, making its user both leaner as well as considerably more vulnerable to vascular distress, as in strokes. An American relative of Ma Huang is Ephedra nevadensis, which grows across the American West and was used in a similar way by Native Americans as well as Mormons, and hence its more common name, Mormon tea. That's it for gymnosperms. The other lineage of big important spermatophytes, splitting away from before the most recent common ancestor of the gymnosperms, is the one that somehow existed through 180 million years without being documented by fossils, only to resurface in the Jurassic in the form of flowering plants. So, where were the ancestors of flowering plants during this time? What did they look like? Good questions, and ones for which we currently don't have any definitive answers.